I'm Dennis Barger, nostalgia store owner. I love comic books. I think I've become kind of an elder statesman in the current comic book world. But there's a big problem with that title. What is the comic book industry? In this video, I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm Dennis Barger, 35-year veteran of selling everything, 21-year veteran of owning stores, and now 4-year veteran of the new concept nostalgia store. I'm here at Cosmic Pop Retro, the newest of my third store in the nostalgia store premise. There's been a lot of talk about what the comic book industry is. The last year has been the most turbulent year, I think, in the comic book industry. I want to bring it back and have some clarity on what the comic book industry is. Let's make everything clear. It starts with the first person. The first person is a creator with an idea. He then has to find other people or be the jack of all trades to create the entire idea for a comic book. Now, he can't do that alone, especially not when this all began. He had to go to a publisher. Somebody had to make these comic books. Well, the publishers could also go out and pick a couple people and they could go, hey, you guys create a comic book. We don't care what it is. It just needs to sell. Either way, those are the two people needed to start a comic book and a comic book industry. And boy, did they do it. How many people did it take to make Action Comics #1? It starts with two people, Siegel and Schuster. They get an idea. They write it up. They presented it to national periodicals, later to become DC Comics. Those publishers bought the idea and said, this might make a good comic book. Let's go ahead and do it. At a certain point, those publishers go to a printer and they get it printed. Then it shows up to the newsstands. I like to say comic book shops now are a lot different from then. Now, most comic shop owners have to go out on the floor and hand sell a comic book. Not back then. The newsstands were the only place where you could get comic books back then. It was a different world, but kids walked up to the newsstands to buy their parents' papers and take it home. And here's, for an extra dime, here's a comic book thing that you could buy and take home and enjoy for yourself. This is the way the entire industry operated for 30 years. Creators create a comic book, publishers publish that comic book, publishers take creators and tell them, we need you to make a comic book for us, and then they would publish the comic book. A lot of money was being made during this time, and the newsstands were getting all of that money. Then came this new idea called conventions. It started in Detroit, called the Detroit Triple Fanfare, after they had a comic book swap meet in 1964. Then somebody in New York got the idea to make it a little bit more organized after that swap meet. And at the same time, in New York and in Detroit, they had the first two comic book conventions. Now, along the way, it wasn't just the big two. There were a lot of indie publishers, a lot of guys that came up with great ideas, great comic books, and slowly but steadily they got absorbed into the big two. They fell to the wayside. They got sued into non-existence. That's another story. And then you've got it boiled down to a handful of comic publishers, a single newsstand distribution model, a way to create new, younger fans with older books, the conventions. But now you've got a new business model, the comic shops. And along with the comic shops became the small press. This was a recreation of that original idea. Two people with an idea, they get a hold of somebody to print it for them or publish it for them, and then they now had a very solid little group of people that they could sell to because they couldn't get on the newsstand with their small profiles. So now that there was a new place to sell comic books, and if you couldn't get on the newsstand before, you were never going to be seen. Then there's two guys from the East Coast. They create a comic book that mimics Daredevil, but with turtles. That's Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman. And those guys printed 500 comic books and took it to San Diego Comic-Con, and they sold out. So they went back home and they created Mirage Studios. Went to an independent printer and printed their comic book. It was actually bigger than most comic books at the time. They then had a place to sell those comic books, the comic book stores that had only been around for about 10 years at this point. And it was huge. They sold out of that first issue instantly. But that shows you where in the models two guys with a great idea could actually succeed. Then came the distributors. They became the conduit, the middleman between the comic book shop and the creators and publishers and small press. Sure, they were needed, but at a certain point, it started to implode upon itself. It happened in the 90s. Now, you've heard about Diamond. Diamond ended up being the winner of the distributor wars. And they distributed all comic books to all comic shops and for all publishers. But that can only last for so long also. And guess what? Diamond went bankrupt last year. Now we have an all-new distributor war. We have so many small presses. And then we have so many middlemen coming in right now. They publish their own comics. They make tons of variants. They produce variants for the publishers that they only share within a small ecosystem. And it's kind of diluted what the comic book industry actually is. It's not about conventions. It's not even about comic shops. I've recreated the comic book shop into a new business model. This is successful. A lot of comic shops are seeing record sales. This is why everything is getting spread out, because there's no centralization around the comic creator and the publishers that publish for them. That's the core of the comic book industry. But it's not without saying that the industry is made up of every one of these levels. And let me just address one small level at the bottom: the flippers. The flippers are important to this industry. They put a perceived value on certain comics that stand out to them. But you cannot manufacture scarcity. You cannot create something just for the sake of making money. It starts with the creators taking the passionate ideas they have and putting it to paper, and people publishing that, and people buying that, and people selling that as part of the core of the comic book industry. An example for this is a lot of recent comic books where one guy gets it in his head that this is going to be short print and is really good. And then he shares it with a whole bunch of his friends and says, I think this is going to be a great investment. And then they all go out there and they gobble up every copy of it. And then they immediately put it on eBay at double, triple, quadruple the original face value. And because they've gotten all the supply and then they've hyped it up online, they now have a demand and they have the entire supply of it. It kind of exploits the industry because a lot of these books are small press books that only have enough money to produce so much of this product. And if they can organize a large group of people to buy up all that supply, they get to control the demand. Guys, it's really important that you understand this. We've gone through this exact same cycle before. The 1990s, Death of Superman, Resurrection of Superman, all of the crazy 5 variant covers with the foil and the spectrum and the hollow and the everything. We've done it before. There were 10,000 comic book shops in the mid-90s. And when the dust settled 2 years later, there was 2,500. We lost 75% of what the industry existed at that time. And we're headed for that exact same disaster today. Guys, if we do not get back to the core essentials of the comic book industry, creators, publishers, comic shops, new ways to sell comics, we are destined to have that asteroid reset us again. But what do I know? I'm Dennis Barger, nostalgia shop owner. but I'm also a fan of the comic book industry. Tell me what you think in the chat.